I'm going to pull this out. Johnny Higdon, President Johnny Higdon, Sergeant Major Johnny Higdon. I'm putting this back in my pocket because we want you to have all the time you can get today. I will say this. This man is dynamic. No, correct that, Milton. This man is a dynamo. He's from here to there, and he's got all these balls, and I'm thinking jugglers only have two hands. I think he's got a third hand. Sergeant Major, retired Sergeant Major Johnny Higdon, President of the Atlanta Chapter 5 of the National Montfort Point Marine Association.
We hold these truths to be self-evident.
Not yet. Okay. 20,000 African-American men trained at a segregated facility known as Montfort Point Camp. They trained during a time where blacks were not allowed to serve in our nation's military. Despite the harshness of racism and segregation, they not only succeeded, but they exceeded all expectations, proving that blacks were just as worthy of the title Marine as their white counterparts. Their success led to the end of segregation in the Marine Corps and paved the way for future generations of Americans to serve. Now, if you remember anything from my presentation today, I want you to remember this startling fact. I mentioned that 20,000 of these heroes served at Montfort Point Camp. In 2012, they were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, which is the nation's highest civilian award for their service and sacrifice to the nation. Out of that 20,000 that served at Montfort Point Camp, to date, the National Montfort Point Marine Association has found just over 3,000 of these heroes and presented them and their families with the Congressional Gold Medal. That, in essence, is the why of the National Montfort Point Marine Association. The why exists to ensure that all of these heroes are recognized and finally receive the gratitude of a grateful nation. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Okay, as mentioned, I'm Johnny Higdon, retired Sergeant Major, United States Marine Corps, and President of Atlanta Chapter 5 of the National Montfort Point Marine Association. And it's my honor to be here with you all today. I definitely want to thank Milton Jones, who's a member of our association as well, for the invite. Skip, sir, thank you for allowing me to be here and talk to these esteemed colleagues. And I want to thank all of you. I do recognize that I serve in an era where every day I walk around, I hear thank you for your service. I know that many of you, upon your return, did not have such gratitude. And I'm so honored and humbled to do everything that I can to ensure that the world finally recognizes the great work that you've done as well for protecting and defending this nation. So thank you all so much. Thank you. Before I get started, of course, Skip did mention that we do have the esteemed pleasure of having in our presence the Honorable Ambassador Theodore Britton, who has been a mentor for me over the years since I've been the chapter president, and I've been in awe every day under his tutelage. So again, if you all could, please join me again in welcome Ambassador Theodore Britton. Everything that I say here about the Montfort Point Marines, remember, the Montfort Point Marines are here. So without further ado, I have a brief video presentation I want to show you, and then we'll get down into some of the facts. Is it?
We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. They are endowed not by acts of parliament, not by acts of kings and queens and princes of earth, not by the Emancipation Proclamation, not by the Civil Rights Act, but by God with certain unalienable rights. And among them are the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is these common values and ideals that unite us today. It was these ideals that broke 168 years of Marine Corps segregation on August 26, 1942. It was these ideals that brought 20,000 African-American men through the gates of Montfort Point Camp. They came from all walks of life. They came to prove that patriotism is indeed colorless.
The Montfort Point Marines were a project. They were allowed into the Marine Corps to prove that they could not be Marines.
My brother George, he came home after boot camp and told me all about it. I said, well, I'm going to follow in his footsteps, so that's what I did. I forged my mother's signature and signed up right out of high school. 17 and a half.
They were the best and the brightest and the toughest. And I said, that's me.
For a long time, the guys who served tried to tell everybody our story, but nobody was listening.
I'm trying to blank all that stuff out because it wasn't pretty.
The Marine Corps didn't want you to know. It's just that simple.
But this is not just Marine Corps history or black history. It's American history, and the world needs to know about the Marshall Point Marines.
The world indeed needs to know about the Moffett Point Marines. The video you just watched was a brief 2-minute trailer to a longer 28-minute video that's on our YouTube channel. I encourage you all to look that video up and watch that video for a deep and very interesting perspective on the history of the Moffett Point Marines. Now, who are the Moffett Point Marines? Again, as stated, these are America's first black Marines. The year was 1941. The World War II was raging abroad, and America had their own battle brewing within our shores, and that was the battle for racial equality. Years after the Civil War had ended and blacks had obtained the right to vote, there was still one basic right being denied to African Americans in this country, and that was the right to serve in our nation's military. Civil rights activists protested this and threatened to march on Washington. A gentleman by the name of A. Philip Randolph threatened the administration that if we didn't change this law and allow blacks to serve in the military, we're going to march on Washington. The Roosevelt administration caved in and passed today what we know as Executive Order 8802. Executive Order 8802, which in essence said all citizens have the right to serve and to defend the nation, which opened the door for blacks in the military. Now, this wasn't a popular idea. As you can see by the headline here at a local paper during that time frame, this was different from the norm. Nobody wanted this to happen. So there was a lot of opposition to the fact of blacks now being allowed to serve in the military. There was one person in particular who had a particular disdain for this, and this was General Holcomb. He was the commandant of the Marine Corps during that time frame. General Holcomb had a famous quote of saying, if there were a question of having a Marine Corps of 5,000 whites or 250,000 Negroes, I'd rather the whites. This was the headwind that the Moffett Pointers were going into during that time frame. Now, luckily, this was an executive order, and General Holcomb had to abide by that executive order. So while he couldn't stop them from coming into the Marine Corps, what he could do was influence how they came into the Marine Corps. So all Marines here know that Marines train in one or two places: Parris Island, South Carolina, or San Diego, California. Well, with the Moffett Point Marines, they decided to do something a little different. They decided to put them in a little-known facility known as Moffett Point Camp. It was an undeveloped training area just outside of Camp Lejeune. And not only that, the Moffett Pointers had to build their own training facility. They literally had to build their training facility from the ground up while going through the rigors of Marine Corps recruit training. There were other rules that hampered them as well. Things like they couldn't go on main side Camp Lejeune unless they were accompanied by a white Marine. They were often arrested for impersonating a Marine. If they ever went out on liberty, out in the town of Jacksonville, in their uniform, it was an anomaly. You know, nobody expected to see blacks in uniform, so they would arrest them and think they were impersonating Marines. They still had to ride the back of the bus. That was no different. And of course, they put a rule in place that no matter what rank they obtained, they could never be in charge of a white Marine. So that complicated the next landmark, and that was the first black officer in the Marine Corps was Frederick Branch. He eventually had to resign his commission due to ongoing discrimination because, remember, blacks could not be in charge of whites. So all that was left for them to do was train. Train and train they did. They trained hard, they trained often, and got quite good at it. So good, in fact, they actually broke long-standing records held by their white counterparts. They eventually find themselves preparing for combat. But even in combat, there was still hesitancy with the black Marines. Instead of letting them be in frontline units, combat units, they put them in support roles, ammo handlers, litter bearers, stewards. They wouldn't allow them to be frontline action and defend the nation. But combat has a funny way of changing that. So as the battle pursued and casualties started to mount, here comes these black Marines with weapons and ammo, and where they find themselves being put on the front line to replenish the ranks. And the Battle of Saipan is when it all happened. The Battle of Saipan is when the black Marines first saw frontline combat, and of course they did what all Marines do. They represented and they took care of business. They did it so good, in fact, that the new commandant said, the Negro Marines are no longer on trial. They're Marines, period. And that, in essence, ended the experiment of the Montford Point Marines, because they had now proven that not only could they survive Marine Corps boot camp, but they can also go and survive the toughest test out there, and that is combat. They were nicknamed Black Angels for their timely contributions in combat, as you can see here by the poster held up by their white counterparts here, saying, "Thank you, Montford Point Marines." Now, of course, World War II ends, and all of our veterans come home to a hero's welcome. Not quite. Not quite. Black Marines came home to a different treatment. During that time frame, the same thing they left to go fight against was waiting on them when they came back home. There was still segregation. There was still racism here. So when they came home, people thought that these veterans are going to try to use their newfound experience to demand more rights out of us. So what they do? Posses formed. They went out and literally pursued these heroes to try to keep them in their place. Lynchings increased. Beatings increased tenfold. It got so bad, in fact, that the headline of the front page of the newspaper was littered with images of veterans being beaten in uniform. It was so bad that President Truman had to get involved and pass Executive Order 9981, which ended segregation in the military altogether. And this is one of the reasons we credit the Montford Point Marines with helping to end segregation in the military, because they proved their worthiness to serve our nation. So the Montford Point Marines took a Marine Corps that looked like this, infused it with a Marine Corps that looked like this, and today we have a Marine Corps that looks like this, that embraced diversity, and now arguably we have the greatest fighting force the world has ever seen. Amen. Now, as a result of the Montford Point Marines, there were several firsts that came about. People like General Frank Peterson, Lieutenant General Frank Peterson, who was our first black pilot and first black three-star general. We have Ann Grimes, who was the first black female officer to retire from the Marine Corps. Now, I added this picture here because these are Medal of Honor recipients from Vietnam. These were the 6 black Marines who were awarded the Medal of Honor in Vietnam, and I thought it would be a timely photo for this audience because, again, receiving the Medal of Honor being the highest award that you can receive, so you can only imagine the lives that they impacted by being Medal of Honor recipients. Now, however, their service wouldn't be possible had it not been for the sacrifice of the Montford Point Marines. So again, just showing the progress and what happened as a result of the Montford Point Marines. We have our first black Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps as a result of the Montford Point Marines. That's Sergeant Major Alfred McMichael. And of course, 2022, just recently, the Marine Corps finally promoted its first black 4-star general. Thank you. Now, as I mentioned, these heroes were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal in 2012 for their service and sacrifice to the nation. There was a ceremony in headquarters of the Marine Corps in 2012 where close to 400 of these heroes were assembled and received their hero's welcome by the Commandant and several 3-star generals, and all presented with their Congressional Gold Medal. Of course, there's a ship today named after the Montford Pointers, the USNS Montford Point. And then there's also a memorial to the Montford Point Marines in Camp Lejeune, just outside the gates of Montford Point Camp to this date. Now, here's the irony about this memorial. If you Google Jacksonville, North Carolina, things to do in Jacksonville, North Carolina, this memorial pops up as easily number 1 or number 2 things to do in Jacksonville, North Carolina. And I say irony because in the 1940s, when the Montford Pointers first got to Jacksonville, they weren't welcome there. They weren't well received. Now today they're embraced and welcomed with open arms. As a matter of fact, the sign says "Welcome Home Heroes" now. So that shows the irony of how times have changed and how they've been embraced, and their contributions are truly understood. So that now leads us to the Montford Point Marine Association, the National Montford Point Marine Association. This is an all-volunteer, nonprofit 501c3 organization established in 1965. There's 29 active chapters across the country in over 20 states. And of course, membership in the organization is open to all veterans, no matter what service, regardless of race, creed, color, and national origin. And of course, our mission is to preserve the legacy of the Montford Point Marines by conducting community engagement activities aimed at educating the public on their service and sacrifice. And of course, on the screen is just a few examples of some of the community engagement activities that we do. Speaking engagements like this, parades, talking to the youth. We're out telling this amazing story. One other milestone was just achieved by the organization in February of 24. We were just recognized by the Department of Veteran Affairs as a veteran service organization, which means we're now able to assist veterans with their claims. So that is something we've been working on tremendously, and we now finally have that under our tutelage, and now we're able to try to spread that across all our chapters so we can do our part with assisting veterans to get benefits for their service. We offer a scholarship as well, a scholarship to deserving seniors to pursue their high school or their college educational goals. Now, I mentioned about the Congressional Gold Medal they were awarded. This is arguably our biggest program. The Congressional Gold Medal program is our pledge to ensure that all 20,000 of these heroes receive the recognition that they deserve. So when we do events such as this, where we go around and we talk about the history of the Montford Point Marines, we're hoping to uncover more families who can say, my father, my grandfather, or I know someone who may have served in the 40s as a Marine. And if so, chances are they were a Montford Point Marine. So the key here, the key with the Congressional Gold Medal program is we look to engage these families, because people want to know, why so few? Why have you only found just over 3,000? Well, if you remember, when they came home to a place where they still wasn't welcome. So many of them couldn't tell their story. They took the story with them to their grave. So their families, while they know they served, don't know a lot about their service. So us telling this story helps uncover just how iconic their service was, and the families come forward with records. We're able to help verify it, and then we can present the family with the Congressional Gold Medal on behalf of their Montford Pointer. And of course, you all recognize that young guy in the photo, right? Yeah, there he is. Yeah, there he is. That's the very own ambassador with his medal. This next gentleman here, excuse me, this was the last living Montford Pointer that we found here in Atlanta. Now, unfortunately, we lost him in September of last year. This is Dr. Shelton, Dr. Lee Shelton, and his story is similar. His family got a hold of us after hearing one of our presentations and was able to show his records and prove that he was a Montford Point Marine. And we were able to go to the house and present his Congressional Gold Medal in front of several of his family members. And when I asked him, how come you never asked about the medal before? He said, well, he heard about it, but he didn't know it was for him. So of course, we were able to go out and present that to him, and it was an amazing event. But like I said, we lost Dr. Shelton back in September. Now, some of the things that we're doing going forward, future projects for the association. Of course, we do have an annual golf tournament that we do. We do that every year. This year is down in Stockbridge, Georgia, at Eagles Landing Golf Club. We do this as a fundraiser to promote the legacy of the Montford Point Marines, and of course, to raise funds to continue to present the Congressional Gold Medals. We're looking at a street naming project we're currently working on with the Atlanta City Council, trying to see if we can honor these heroes with a street naming here in Atlanta. And of course, this year, our chapter has the proud privilege of hosting our national convention. Some of you may have I passed out a little card. That card is, again, it talks about that convention. We're having a national convention here in Atlanta. Every year we host a convention, but this is the first time since 2011 or 2012 where it's coming to Atlanta. So we're excited about that in July, a 4-day event. And of course, you're all invited, of course, but we'd love to have you come out there and celebrate the legacy of these heroes. Now, at this convention, I'm going to briefly talk about what we're going to do at this convention. This is going to be, again, a 4-day event with nothing but honor and praise for these heroes, as well as information for veterans. For instance, we're hosting a vet expo. All right, more info will come out about this. We're still contacting agencies right now, such as the VA, to come out and be able to provide services for veterans in the area. So we're doing a Congressional Gold Medal ceremony. We've discovered more families, and we're going to do a bulk Congressional Gold Medal ceremony presentation at our convention as well. We're also doing what we call a celebration of first. Right? This is an awards gala that we're doing. And when I say celebration of first, we're going to recognize pioneers in military history, people like the Moffett Point Marines and Ambassador Britton, people like the Tuskegee Airmen, people like the 6th AAA Postal Battalion. We want to recognize them for paving the way for where the military is today. So this is guaranteed to be a great event. And again, I encourage you all to go to the site that's listed on the pamphlet and look at information for registration or some of the events. We'd love to have you in attendance. And with that said, ladies and gentlemen, and this is kind of what the event will look like when we're done. As we're putting it all together, this is kind of what it looks like. But with that said, ladies and gentlemen, this is the contact info for our website or our email. If you have any questions, I encourage you all to please reach out to the organization. If you know of anyone that you think served in the 40s, please let us know so that we can ensure that the family has received the Congressional Gold Medal and that hero has been honored for their service. With that, I want to thank you for your time, and I'll take any questions if you want to have any questions.
Yes, sir.
You can hold on to that. I think I can be heard. I always like to use my phone voice. Okay. I've been looking at examining a lot of the things from World War II, and I concluded that there were two Marine Corps functioning at the time. The de jure Marine Corps in Washington, D.C., and the de facto Marine Corps at Montfort Point. Actually, the de jure became the de facto one because the de facto was the only one that we recognize today. At that time, the de jure Marine Corps in Washington, D.C. was all white. For 167 years, non-whites had been excluded. That was Indians, Negroes, and mulattoes. Okay. But at the same time in World War II, the commanding officer was white, a wonderful gentleman by the name of Colonel Samuel A. Woods, Jr., who's never been recognized for what he did. He was a commanding officer. He recruited 100 enlisted men, white, to train us. And of course, we ended up with 19,468 of us to be trained by them until such time as we were able to train ourselves. The colonel who had been recruited, possibly because he was a graduate of the Citadel and was a Southern white, in accordance with the famous Army War College doctrine, that he was the best one to handle black folks, was chosen as our leader. He turned out to be one of the most revered people ever to serve in the Marine Corps. Is that? Oh, anyway, when we established the Hall of Fame of the Montfort Point Association, Colonel Samuel A. Woods was one of the first people inducted into the Hall of Fame. He's buried in Arlington National Cemetery. He was a colonel throughout the war. He was discharged in 1946 because of esophageal hemorrhaging. Colonel Woods changed the Marine Corps. It was the last branch of the armed forces that was exclusively white. Today, the Marine Corps is approximately, I think it's something like 34% is minorities, just not black, but all kinds of minorities. But Colonel Woods has never gotten the credit that I think that he should have been given. And I'm working indirectly and directly with the Citadel to make sure that they recognize Colonel Woods. Okay, let me get to another little piece of it. You folks are too young to remember, I'm sure. Well, I'll be 100 in October, so I'm different. I can see a different perspective. World War II came on the heels of the Depression. Have you ever heard of the Depression? Not only black folks were poor, but there's a lot of folks, period, were poor. One gentleman who was black, who came out of Charlotte, North Carolina, said that when he arrived at the Marine Corps, they told him that they were serving dinner, so he should go down and get dinner while they were doing other things. He went down and he was looking for a cash register at the end of the counter. Some of you don't know what a cash register is, so do I have to explain what a cash register is? Anyway, he said he was looking for the cash register because he didn't have any money. And he was filling up his plate. They were filling up his plate, packing it on his tray and what have you. And he said when he got down at the end of the counter, he asked, well, what do I owe you? And the fellow said, you don't owe anything. This is free. You get 3 meals a day. I don't remember reading about anybody in this country who was getting 3 meals a day at that time. So he was suddenly looking up, and he had come in with holes in his shoes and cardboard in his shoes because his shoes, to keep out the water. The Marine Corps gave him 2 new pairs of shoes, an overcoat, 2 suits, underwear, caps, and what have you. Then at the middle of the month, suddenly he was called down to the pay office and they gave him pay, cash, $21 a month. You know, in those days, you scuffled on what you got. You didn't have such a thing as a regular job. Some of you may know about it. But the point is, here was he, suddenly here, he's getting 3 meals a day, free medical treatment anytime he needed it, clothes, food. He said, like heaven on earth. So whenever people talk about segregation, discrimination and what have you, I think back to this gentleman and a lot of others because under that Army War College doctrine, it said you should always recruit black men from the South because they were accustomed to obeying and everything else like that. Okay, as I think about it, and I was born in South Carolina. I went to New York when I was 11. People ask me, when did I leave South Carolina? And I always tell them, as soon as I found out where I was. Okay. When I remember, little that I remember, you walked kind of deferentially. You didn't speak too loud. You kind of lowered your head when you spoke to white folks and what have you. And you sort of knew your place. When you came out of the Marine Corps, you were standing erect, chin in, chest out, shoulders back. And when someone spoke to you, they were supposed to be able to hear you down the way there. That's why I'm talking to you now. But in addition, when you talk to a person, no matter who he was, even when he was an officer, a high-ranking officer, you looked him in the eye. This was a different kind of black man who went back to the South. He was a Marine. Now, by the way, I want to correct something. The title of ambassador, the rank of ambassador, is the only one in federal government that's permanent, other than military titles. So I don't wear the cap quite often because I don't want to be mistaken strictly as an enlisted man. When I went up to Camp Lejeune, and it turned out that the commandant and the others were escorting me around and putting them on my shoulders and what have you. Some of my fellow Marines who came out as enlisted during World War II were kind of wondering what's going on. Why is this man so nice? Anyway, the fact is the rank of ambassador is 4 stars. And since it represents the president and is permanent, all of the military people kind of make sure that they're very deferential and nice to the ambassador. So I wear that cap to pay respects to the State Department and to the president who appointed me. One other thing that comes to mind is, as I think about this, I always want to pay my respects to it. I missed out on a commission because I talked too much. The Marine Corps wanted to set up an all-black trucking company in Harlem in 1948. I'm not against black folks. I don't feel bad here. But again, I preferred infantry, but then there were rifle companies, there were signal companies and what have you. And so I said, instead of just giving us a trucking company, and by the way, you haven't even talked about officers yet, we want to have our choice of all of the companies. And the answer was no. And so I was a scoutmaster at the church of the second black congressman. When I went in the Marine Corps, there was only one black congressman in the entire U.S. government. Today, there's something like 55 or so. But this gentleman was outspoken. His name was Adam Clayton Powell. He got after the Secretary of Defense, who then talked with the president, and next thing, I got a copy of a letter from the Marine Corps saying, henceforth, all organizations will be open without regard to race, creed, or color. That's what we have today. But when I applied to the commission, for a commission during Korean War, everything was going along fine until one of the lieutenants remembered that I had protested the Marine Corps and forced the Marine Corps to change. And lightning struck, what did they used to call that place? Whatever it was, but lightning struck it. And it flashed all over me. Everybody got up and walked out on me. I was disappointed, not getting a commission, but I'm here today because a hell of a lot of guys froze to death up in Korea. And who knows, I might have been one of those gung-ho people out there in Vietnam with the rest of you. Because when I hear some of the problems going on now, my heart goes out to all Vietnam veterans, especially Vietnam veterans. There aren't many of the others around. But I don't think our men and women ever suffered more in any war than the Vietnam War. We took bullets, we took fragments, shells, and what have you. But it's like my friend General Livingston tells me that he was a captain out there. He came in one night, he was so tired, he was having his men to rest. And he said at one time he lay down on something soft and he fell asleep. He didn't care what it was, but it was soft. And the next morning when he woke up, the darn thing started moving. It was a python. Okay. But I was just talking, I think it might have been Terry who said that for 3 months he slept on the open ground out there. Sometimes wet, sometimes hot, sometimes cold. You veterans suffered more than I can think of any war. Others have gone through temporary things. So my heart goes out to you. I did the write-up to a book called Echoes of Our War. One of the fellows is so shot through with fragments, they can't operate because if they do, it's the end of his life. In addition, they can't take them out. So it's painful every day. But I'm getting away from Montfort Point. The old saying is, too soon we get old and too late smart. We know a hell of a lot now. We didn't know a lot. No. I was in social work for a long time, and I used to ask us as we went on projects, if we are successful, what will be different? And I think back to this war, and I praise you for your service. Thank you for your service. But if we had won, what would have been different? When I went to Paris Island, I was sitting with 4 of the guys who had served in Vietnam, and they said, we lost. And I said, no, you didn't lose. I said, we won, but it's not the way we want to win. 58,000 of our guys, yes. But 3 million of the Vietnamese people, that's not the way we win. We don't just kill people just to kill people. It's not in the American psyche. But we don't want to raise our hands. 3 of our presidents have visited Vietnam. Many of our veterans have gone back over to meet with their counterparts and do whatever they can to help. That's because it's in your system. You're that kind of person. You have that kind of a feeling. I'm talking much too long, but when you're 100 years old, you don't know how long you can talk. So since you all have been so kind listening, if I get up there first, I'll put in a good word for all of you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. Questions for Johnny, please.
The one thing that really comes to mind is when you were talking about Saipan. Most people don't realize that that was considered the D-Day of the Pacific. And that's why when the Montford Point Marines were moved up to the front, it became a very, very, very high entity. And people don't remember that stuff. But when we talk about Vietnam, people don't realize what the Vietnam vet actually went through. During the Second World War, in that 4-year war, the number of days of actual combat that those people saw was about 40 to 41 days. In Vietnam, it was like 258. Check it out. And that's why when we came back, you know, you had all these people that were really suffering from PTSD, but we considered them crazy. And then lastly, most people don't realize in the Marine Corps, as a Marine, that we had just as many, almost more kills, KIAs, in Vietnam than we did in World War II and Korea combined for the Marine Corps. It was devastating.
Yeah. Thank you, Sergeant Major. Thank you, Bill.
Skip in the back.
I'd like to add something to Education Hour. I'm going to ask a question, and I'm asking this because we're eliminating Black history, we're eliminating discussion of anything related to us Black folk from our curriculums throughout the United States, which I think is deplorable. My first question, within 10 years, I'd like anybody here to tell me what was the first integrated military group, Army, Navy, etc., in the United States. Within 10 years. What do you say?
Are you asking for the date?
Yes.
46?
46?
I would say Army.
Anybody else? It was 1780. George Washington had an integrated unit in approximately 1780, which was subsequently discontinued within approximately 6 months because South Carolina congressmen did not want integrated troops. We talked about the long period of time that Black troops served in Vietnam, which was abysmal. The longest serving group in WW2 was an artillery group of Black folk, which had constant battle for approximately 300 days. The shock troops for Teddy Roosevelt in San Juan Hill, which caused him to develop the name which led to him being president, was a group of white cavalrymen. The first person to die in Revolutionary War was Crispus Attucks, a Black man. We Black folk, the troops that got wiped out on charging Fort Sumter in this Revolutionary War, led by a white captain whose cousin was Elizabeth Barrett Browning, was a Black group from Massachusetts. If you folks have been to Fort Sumter, you see that the entrance is approximately 2 miles of sand. These guys were charging a fort under cannon fire in the sand. I mean, my point is, we cannot let this history die because there's some people who don't feel that we're worthy of telling our history. Our history is supposed to be homogeneous. I grew up in inner city Detroit. I didn't know any white folk. When I went to the military, I met a lot. Didn't really know them. I came back home. I went to medical school, and a doctor, David Foley, was the reason I finished medical school, because he kicked my ass. I appreciated that. My attitude towards white people in general was predicated tremendously upon this man whom before I viewed as almost an enemy. Again, I hope you folks will change your attitude about our history.
Isaac Walker was the 69th person recruited by the first person in Philadelphia to assemble the Marines. He was African. So the Marine Corps had its first Africans in 1775. And I just wanted to add that to your knowledge, just in passing. Thank you.
We have a member here, Milton Jones, who's sitting back there. Those of you who have not seen our video, The Truths and Myths About Vietnam, watch his interview. It struck me, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Not only did he serve honorably as a Marine in Vietnam, but he was subjected to double discrimination. And his description of what it was like when he was sitting in the airport, that he was so proud of having served and so proud of the decorations he had received. And then he went home only to find out that he was being discriminated both because he was black and because he served in Vietnam. I think those of us that were white that went to Vietnam, first of all, the first thing I found out is blood is red. It doesn't make any difference what's on the outside of the skin. Blood is red. And the other thing is, some of the finest performances I ever saw, and I was in the Army Infantry and Artillery in Vietnam, some of the finest, bravest performances I ever saw were black males in Vietnam. But bravery is not restricted to a color of somebody's skin. We loved each other regardless of what our race was. That's all I'm saying.
Sergeant Major, I echo what Kerry just said. I was in the field artillery. Remember, our first sergeant was black. Chiefest Buck was black. They did a darn good job. Who trained the black Marines at Montford Point, sir?
Well, again, the question was who trained the black Marines. Well, initially, again, there was a cadre of white Marines assembled, and they eventually turned that over to drill instructors like Sergeant Major Huff, Sergeant Major Mark Johnson, and the list goes on. But there was a cadre of them that were trained to take over it. So the white Marines initially did it for about the first year, and then after that, the cadre of black Marines that were trained up took over the training at Montford Point. And they often talked about how they were 10 times tougher on them than the initial white drill instructors, because they knew how good they had to be in order to succeed.
Yes, I'm John Blair. Some of you know me a lot about me, but I served in October 1967 in the Marine Corps, 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines. Right. I slept under the stars. I was in Khe Sanh during the Tet Offensive. We fought more up there. Look, I know we talk about black and white, but let me tell you, that wasn't even an issue when I was in Vietnam. I was a grunt, 0311. You guys know what 0311, you Marines know what it is. Look, you know, it wasn't even an issue. I mean, we got along. We were Marines. We got along. We slept under the stars. You talk about sleeping under the stars. I never was in a bunker. And I've got pictures. I slept under the stars, and I stayed up around. We patrolled the mountains of Khe Sanh, and up around that area, went into Laos in 68. So a lot of things went on. But let me tell you what, it was just me and him all the time. So I appreciate this, but I just want to let you know that's the way, when I was in Vietnam, that's the way it was. Nothing else.
I've got a question. Is there a museum history or a historical museum somewhere? Is that in Jacksonville also?
Yes, so the museum is on Montford Point Camp, and today Montford Point Camp is called Camp Johnson. If any of you have seen it driving by. But there's a national museum there as well, and with tons of exhibits. And then, of course, those are available as well. If you contact them to be displayed other places, they can loan out exhibits, so to speak, so to help spread the word. But yeah, there is a national museum there in Jacksonville, North Carolina.
There's also an issue in
They're building. They're still building that one up. But yes, there is. Yes.
Other questions? Well then, a big round of thanks. No. To my way of thinking, this was a terrific, very moving story, sad in many ways, but ultimately uplifting. And it was a real history lesson. So thank you very much. And on behalf of the AVVBA, pleased to present you with number one, a challenge coin.
Wow.
Don't mess with any of us. And number two, if you have insomnia, this is really I find very, very interesting. All of us put together our stories.
Yes.
And it should provide some very interesting reading.
Yes.
So thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Nice having you here. Really.
Thank you all.